We are all involved in building a motherland. We are all involved. We are all involved. We are all involved in building a motherland. Arise, you leaders of tomorrow. Let's no vain ambition divide you. One nation, one people, one destiny, one charter is our guide. Arise, you leaders of tomorrow. Let's no vain ambition divide you. One nation, one people, one destiny, one charter is our guide. We are all involved. We are all involved. We are all involved in building a motherland. We are all involved. We are all involved. We are all involved in building a everybody, waya waya lukoko, waya lukoko. Everybody, bring your calabash, yeah. Everybody, yeah, bring your calabash, yeah. Everybody, yeah, bring your calabash, yeah. Oh, waya lukoko, waya lukoko, waya lukoko, waya lukoko. Everybody, yeah, bring your calabash, yeah. Everybody, yeah, bring your calabash, yeah. Everybody, yeah. Everybody, waya waya lukoko, waya lukoko. Everybody, bring your calabash, yeah. Everybody, yeah, bring your calabash, yeah. Everybody, yeah, bring your calabash, yeah. Oh, waya lukoko, waya lukoko, waya lukoko, waya lukoko. Everybody, yeah, bring your calabash, yeah. Everybody, yeah, bring your calabash, yeah. Waya waya lukoko, waya waya lukoko. I said waya waya lukoko, waya waya lukoko. Everybody, bring your calabash, bring your calabash. Mo fẹ́ mo kẹ́chẹ́ ní àbá. Waya waya lukoko, waya waya lukoko, waya waya lukoko. I say waya waya lukoko, waya waya lukoko. Everybody, bring your calabash, bring your calabash. Mo fẹ́ mo kẹ́chẹ́ ní àbá. Waya waya lukoko. Oh, balogo shake it, balogo shake it, balogo. Balogo shake it, balogo waya waya lukoko, waya waya lukoko. I say waya waya lukoko, waya waya lukoko. Everybody,
6th of March 1957, a country was born. And on that day, on that fateful 6th of March 1957, the European flag was lowered. On that day, Theodore Cohort flag was everywhere. Indeed, a new dawn has been given to this country. The red, gold, green, black star was celebrating. Let me tell you something. Ghana, our beloved country, is free forever. That was the voice of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. Now I'm asking, is this country indeed free forever? A country where our leaders are no more proud that their children will be citizens by birth of this country. I'm sorry, forgive me. Some may say I'm being too political. I'm not. I can call myself a citizen of this country by birth, not because my parents are citizens of this country, but by birth. Our leaders' children are now being dual citizens. My heart bleeds. I don't know how many of us have been watching TV3 News at 360. If you do, Kwamla Adom, one fine young man who is growing up to become one of the finest journalists in this country, went to a cold north to report a documentary on education. It saddens my heart when our leaders are playing politics with our education system. Meanwhile, they fly their children out of this country just to get degrees. Am I even saying degrees? Just SHS, senior high. This is our motherland country. Our independence will be meaningless until we unite Ghana with African continent. That was the second statement made by Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. But I'm sad to see that indeed our independence is so meaningless. Some might agree with me, Some might also say no. It's fine. But corruption is now our middle name. It's everywhere. We are calling for fix the country, fix the country. Procurement officer, have you fixed yourself in your office? Board of directors, have you fixed yourself on that board meeting? MDs, have you fixed yourself in that office? Human resource managers, have you fixed yourself? If you haven't, stop calling for fix the country and fix yourself first. This country will never see development. It's not a curse. But we will see development and improvement when we let go of corruption, when we let go of selfishness and love this country as our own blood. Let's love this country as a first child will love his or her mother, and a mother will love a child. After all, this is our home. Thank you.
Everybody Bantama, Yako, Bantama, 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 Kumasi Bantama, Kumasi Bantama. Yanko, Bantama, 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 Kumasi Bantama, Kumasi Bantama, everybody Bantama, Yanko, Bantama, 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 Kumasi Bantama, Kumasi Bantama, everybody Bantama, Yanko, Bantama, 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 Kumasi Bantama, Kumasi Bantama, everybody Bantama, Mamiala Tawa Woneba, Obedi Kukunte, Mamiala Tawa Woneba, Obedi Kukunte, Mamiala Tawa Woneba, Obedi Dawa Dawa, Mamiala Tawa Woneba, Obedi Dawa Dawa, Zamina, Mina, Zamina, Mina, 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 Abele. Oh, Zamina, Mina, 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 Abele. Zamina, Mina, 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 Abele. Oh, Zamina, Mina, 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 Abele. Mamiala Tawa Woneba, Obedi Kumpunte. Mamiala Tawa Woneba, Obedi Kumpunte. Mamiala Tawa Woneba, Obedi Dawa Dawa. Mamiala Tawa Woneba, Obedi Dawa Dawa. Banchi, 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 yeah, papa, banchi, yeah, papa, banchi, 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 kokonte, banchi, 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 kokonte, banchi, oh yanko, zamina, mina, 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 zamina, mina, 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 zamina, mina, 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 kumasi bantama bele, oh, zamina, mina,
No manyi beya ebesia ebetumpona no ding in a frivo trade upon siro manyi siro manyo siro omangana no manyi beya besia ebetumpona frivo Shira omangana na yenyo dunia sumjedi asumuda.
Shira, Shira yenda, mayeno doda. Mayefo yenda yeno, mayeni jeso, erie peyeda. Ashadi panina friwo, yare yenda da da. Shira Suda, Erade Shira, Shira Yenda, Da Shira Dana, Da Shira Yenda, Erade Shira, Shira Yenda, Amayeni Jenso, Da Elepe Yeda. Shira, 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 Erade Shira, 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 Sisa, 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 Erade Sisa, 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 Shira, 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 Yendo, Shira, Shira, Yendo, Shira, Shira, Dana, Amayeni Jenso, Erepe Yeda. Shira, 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 Erade Shira, 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 Sisa, 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 Erade Sisa, 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 Shira, 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 Yendo, Shira, Shira, Yendo, Shira, Yendo, Shira, Yendo, Erade Shira, Shira, Dana, Amayeni Jenso, Da Elepe Yeda.
It's exactly 10:10 a.m. and good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of our session on climate change communication, advocacy, and activism. Yesterday, we had an insightful session laying the foundation for understanding the role of communication in raising awareness and driving action on climate issues. Today, I encourage us to build on the momentum as we dive deeper into what it means to effectively communicate climate change in ways that not only inform but also inspire action. As young climate innovators and advocates, your role in communication is vital. And I want you to take a moment and think about this. What does communication mean to you in the context of climate change? Feel free to drop your thoughts in the chat box. I'll read them out. And there is no wrong or right answer. From our discussion yesterday, what you learned from our discussion, drop maybe a word or something you remember from Professor Gajepo's presentation as we prepare to welcome her to take the lectern. Hello, please, are we there?
Yes,
Yes, please.
we are
Okay.
there. We are there.
So what does
We are typing.
Oh, okay. Alvin is saying communication is key in disseminating climate information. Hence, we have to be intentional and utilize storytelling. Good. Julius is saying barriers to communication include attitude of audience, language, complex scientific terms, among others. Great. Daniel is saying communication is essential to inform the society about climate change and addressing the challenge it poses. Okay, thank you. So whether it is through raising awareness, sharing knowledge, or driving dialogue, communication is key to ensuring people are informed and engaged in the fight against climate change. As we go through today's session, let's reflect on how we can improve our communication strategies, not as individuals, but as a global movement. Now, to lead us through today's session is our very own mother, Professor Audrey Gajepo, who is an expert in the field of communication studies. As I said in her profile yesterday, there is no need going through the entire profile again. So please join me in welcoming Professor Audrey Gajepo to lead us through today's conversation. Thank you. Professor Gajepo, the podium is yours.
Thank you, Terry. I am going to share my screen, and hopefully today.
Yes.
Can you see the full screen rather than, because I understand yesterday you couldn't see the full screen. Can you see the full screen?
Yes, we can see the full screen now.
It's in presentation mode. Okay,
Yeah.
great. Pardon? Okay, so good morning to everybody. I'm really glad that we can continue our conversation. And I will start by recapping what we discussed yesterday. And let me just start. And I like that Terry has already started us off by asking for what you learned yesterday, your key takeaways. But I just want to quickly recap. I think that yesterday it was important for us to understand that there are a variety of reasons for communicating climate change. So think about the reasons that we discussed yesterday and relate it to the goals that you have as young climate innovators and advocates. And when you think about those reasons, it boils down to one important factor that I will call and that experts have identified as bridging the science action gap. So we need to bridge the science and the gap between science, what we know, our knowledge, the information we have, and action, how we can translate our knowledge, our information into action. What does it take? Okay, we have to, but before we can do that effectively, we have to understand the role communication plays in it, how communication works. Yesterday, we talked about the characteristics of communication. We also talked about some of the challenges and barriers to communication. And we discussed how we can strive for more effective communication. We don't just want to communicate, we want to communicate effectively. And two important things to keep in mind when you are striving for effective communication is tailoring your communication and tailoring the strategies you use to suit the audience. Yesterday, we talked about the different audiences that we want to communicate to. So we need to learn how to tailor that. And there's a lot involved in doing that. But at the end of the day, what we want to achieve is to be able to build our capacities in telling compelling stories based on science and facts that will shift the needle, that will move people. We'll use the information we have as knowledge brokers and shift the needle such that there'll be action, there'll be some sort of change. Now, where does advocacy fit in? Yesterday, we talked about communication, but in order to bring about change, we need advocacy. We need to be actively seeking to do that. Change will not come if we have the knowledge, we have the information, and we do nothing about it. We need to take steps. So now it's important for us to understand what advocacy means. It means giving support to a cause, okay? And I have to presume that you already are committed to the cause of climate change, but you need to actively show your support to a cause. Advocacy also implies that there's a struggle in the realm of communication to establish a perspective on an issue. In other words, there are different perspectives out there. People think about climate change in different ways, and everybody is jostling to be heard, okay? Your role as young climate communicators is to figure out, and it involves a bit of a struggle, you struggle to figure out and to get your voice heard, to get your perspective out there, okay? To establish through communication what the issue is that you want change to occur on, which means voices must be heard, raising voices, making your voices heard, using collective voice to defend rights. You can do it individually, but you know, in your own little corner, you can try and make change. But change on a community level, change on a national level, change on a global level requires collective voices that can defend the rights that you're pushing, that can defend the issues that you're pushing. So we have to understand that advocacy is grounded in some values, ethical values around specific issues, okay? And it's on a higher plane. Your motivation is not because you want to be noticed, you want to gain attention for attention's sake, you want to make money, none of that. There's a higher ideal. And that ideal usually, when we talk about advocacy, is the search for justice. So we need to understand what climate advocacy entails. And deriving from what I have just discussed, we have to see climate advocacy as publicly supporting sustainable use of resources, calling for actions to address climate change in local communities, but not just local communities, on governmental levels, at international levels. And usually, what we do is mount advocacy campaigns in order to get things done. And advocacy campaigns really refer to coordinated series of activities. So this is a series, not just a one event. The campaign is not a one event. It's a series of activities. It's a series of efforts at promoting a particular cause, influencing public opinion, driving policy change, very important, you know. So you have to think of what is my campaign about? So you don't, in fact, if you're committed to the cause, you are likely to be involved in more than one advocacy campaign, depending on the issue you identify that needs to be tackled. And that issue could simply be trying to change people's opinions on a particular aspect relating to the climate. And that will necessitate a different strategy for your campaign, different audiences, that sort of thing. Or you are a little bit more ambitious. Perhaps you are interested in getting a law passed. You have done your homework. You've decided that part of the reason that certain things are happening is because we don't have laws to address it. So in that case, you are attempting to drive policy, okay? It also involves strategic communication, planned strategic communication, so that you engage the variety of stakeholders that will help you drive the change that you're seeking. You know, so the public, for example, if you had an advocacy campaign to get people to stop to use energy efficient equipments and implements, then you're targeting the public. Like I said, Sometimes your stakeholder is a policy maker because you want to change policy. You want to change a law, or you want to change guidelines, something like that. You want to influence policy. Sometimes the stakeholder is businesses, because businesses can be the problem. So if you identify that businesses are the problem, then your advocacy must identify them as stakeholders that you need to engage. Or sometimes businesses are the solution. I don't want to be negative about businesses. We need businesses to survive. If businesses are the solution, how do we engage them in our advocacy campaigns? And importantly, civil society organizations, and that I included in that also non-governmental organizations. So the broad variety of civil society organizations. And you should think of that broad variety of civil society organizations, including maybe yours, but also trade unions, for example, interest groups, media. Sometimes media is included in civil society, sometimes is identified outside of civil society. Now, why is climate change advocacy important? Perhaps I should have stopped and given you a quiz on this one. But in the interest of time, I think it's important for us to recognize that advocacy is needed if we want to raise awareness. So we want to bring the issue of climate change to the forefront of public consciousness, to the attention of those that we think need to be sensitized on the issue, need to be engaged on the issue, sometimes need to be called out on the issue, okay? So bringing the issue of climate change to the forefront of public consciousness it's raising awareness. And then engaging on the issue, okay? Getting more people to come on board beyond our circle, beyond our networks. We want a broad range of people to come be involved in the kinds of conversations we're going to be having, in the kinds of activities we're going to be mounting, and in the kinds of changes we want to see. So encouraging public engagement and involvement in climate change action means that we have to play the role of advocates, okay? If we want to shape public opinion and attitudes towards climate change, we have to be advocates. How do we influence public opinion? If we want to empower communities to take action at the local level, we need to be advocates. And like I said, if we want to drive policy change, we need to be advocates. So that's why advocacy is important. Perhaps I need to ask you, maybe one or two of you can put in the chat whether there are other reasons why climate change advocacy is important, because I'm always minded that these are some of the key ones, but this is not an exhaustive list. So can you think of other reasons why advocacy would be important? Another way to look at this question is to say, without advocacy, we cannot do ... How about that? Let's give ourselves 2 quick minutes to type something. It will be hard to do ... without advocacy. Okay. Terry, do we have any?
Yes, we have.
Yes.
I think, okay. So Cosmos is saying that we do advocacy to effect change.
Mm-hmm.
Oko Kamokolo is to promote development. Godfred said it helps addresses challenges. Mark is saying it will be hard to mitigate climate change without advocacy. Mercy Havon is saying to ensure climate justice. Joel is saying without advocacy, we cannot effectively communicate climate change. Christiana is saying climate advocacy can help address climate injustice. Daniel is saying to
Okay.
reduce stereotype. Gerardo is
To
saying
reduce
without
what?
stereotype.
Stereotypes. Okay.
Yeah.
So if you think that the challenge, somebody talked about to address challenges. So if the challenge is that it relates to stereotypes, there are stereotypes that are misleading about climate change, you need advocacy to reduce it. Okay.
Okay.
Please go
And then
ahead.
Gerardo is saying without advocacy, we can't achieve our global goals of keeping the Earth's temperature below 2 degrees Celsius.
Yeah, Geraldo is absolutely a scientist on this. Yeah, so very goal minded that we have a goal in mind to reduce temperatures. And so we need advocacy to achieve that goal. Fantastic. Okay.
And then Zachary is saying without advocacy, we cannot support vulnerable communities.
Uh-huh.
And Derek is saying it will be hard to speed up actions geared towards solving climate crisis on the part of various stakeholders without advocacy. And Faith is saying that climate change campaign. And then Rachel is saying advocacy holds decision makers accountable for their actions and ensures that they are transparent and responsive to the needs of
I
the
like
community.
that also. I like it. It's Rachel, eh? Rachel, I
Yeah.
mean, I appreciate all the other perspectives, but I'm highlighting a couple of them so that we keep that in mind as well. Rachel's point about without advocacy, we cannot hold duty bearers accountable for the things
Yeah.
that they need to do in order to bring about the change that we desire, right?
Yes, Prof.
Okay.
And then for Fauzia is saying without climate change advocacy, it will be difficult to promote sustainability. And
Okay.
Suleiman is saying without we can't effectively address the urgent and pressing issues of climate change.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you all very much for your contributions. They certainly complement what I have shared with you. Some of them fit into what I've shared with you, but they expand on it and they complement. Thank you. Okay, so now there are different types of advocacy that people engage in bringing about change on climate-related issues mount. And I'll just go through them, even though I'll settle on one. So the first, and perhaps one that you probably are, well, maybe not. Well, yeah, some of you would be familiar with, is the grassroots advocacy, okay? And by grassroots, and I think maybe yesterday I may have even mentioned it, perhaps not, but it implies ground up. So ground up advocacy on climate issues. And this is driven by a broad group of individuals and constituents, okay? So it's from the basic level, you know. So grassroots happens in communities, small communities. They could be medium-sized communities, but they come from the ground up, not top down. Then there is policy advocacy. And these days, particularly for a lot of us engaged in research of all kinds, in all kinds of fields, people are really interested in using research findings, using science to influence policy. Okay, so what does that mean? Policy advocacy means having a structured and sequenced plan of action aimed at decision makers. And it could be that your purpose is to get them to initiate a policy on climate change, or you get them to prevent a policy on climate change that they may be thinking about. Think about policy influencing. I think one that jumps into my mind doesn't have to do with climate, but has to do with attempts but failed of getting government not to implement the e-levy policy. It was a policy, right? We wanted them not to implement it, even though in the end we failed on that. You know, and sometimes also policy advocacy, yes, like I said, you want to influence that, either to get new policies implemented, to get decision makers to do that, or to even direct sometimes the way the policy is going. The policy is not bad, but your advocacy, because of where you're situated, suggests that, you know, they need to tinker with it in ways that will benefit perhaps particular groups of people that they hadn't thought about properly in the formulation of the policy, etc. Then there's corporate. And corporate is when organizations take a public stand on climate issues. So sometimes corporations, organizations, including big corporations, may decide that they are mounting advocacy related to climate issues. Can you think of any? If you can, put it in the chat. And in fact, as I am talking, perhaps it would be good if you think of if any examples of grassroots advocacy come to mind, or policy advocacy, all on climate change, not on anything else, or policy on climate change, or corporate advocacy. And then the final one implicates you. And in fact, as I was preparing for this, I said, well, you guys are a great example. Okay. Or hopefully you will be great examples of youth-led advocacy. And that is when people like you are involved in all aspects of the advocacy process. You decide what the issue is. You decide the object of your advocacy. Who is the audience? Who is the target of my advocacy? Who do I want to engage? What strategies will I use? You know, and then you do it yourselves. You're not other the geriatrics like us are not the ones doing the advocacy. It's led by young people. I'm very interested in you identifying that. I don't want to preempt it, but can you think of some great youth-led advocacy campaigns? Terry, are we beginning to get contributions?
Yes, I have one in the chat. So
Okay.
first example, Wycliffe. Felix is saying Wycliffe.
Okay, that Wycliffe is an example of what? Youth-led, right?
Yes, that's what he's saying.
Yes, okay.
And then
I sort of refer to that. I want us to come up with other examples. This is an obvious example, as I said. Yeah.
and then Messi is saying the Paris Agreement is an example of policy advocacy.
Okay. Who were the advocates of that? Messi. tell Mercy to complete her thought by telling us who the advocates were of the Paris Agreement to influence.
And then, so Christiana and Mohammed are saying GAYO, Green Africa Youth Organization. And
I don't know who that is. Maybe some of us don't. So
yeah.
when you put it in the chat, you need to explain a little bit so that we are all, remember yesterday we said that the context of communication, there should be commonality. So for somebody like me who doesn't have as much of the climate change science knowledge as you do, and perhaps experience as you do, my experience is limited to communication and communication related to climate change inclusive. You may want to expand. And in fact, that's a great lesson for you all, is that when you communicate using acronyms or not explaining the context to your audience, bearing in mind who the audience is, will mean that you haven't communicated effectively. So I want to know what did you call them? The grain? Hang on 1 minute. There's a plain.
Green Africa Youth Organization. And then Alvin is saying Greta Thunberg's Fridays for Future is an example.
Yeah, okay.
And then Mami Sika is saying policy advocacy, net zero by 2030.
Okay.
Friday for future. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So here you do have some examples in mind. We can perhaps move on, but it gives us an idea of the fact that there are all of these examples of the different kinds of advocacy on climate. Now, you've brought up some great examples. I want you to turn the lens to yourselves and to ponder how you can influence you. And I don't mean others, but think about yourselves. How can you influence climate policy through advocacy? In fact, if you want to look at it from your own experiences, perhaps you're already involved outside of Wycliffe, but also if you want to think about it in terms of what Wycliffe collectively can do to influence climate policy through advocacy. Take a few moments and share in the chat.
Well, please, can you come clearer? I didn't really get you.
Okay. I said that you can see the exercise on the screen, can't you? How can you influence
Yes,
climate
please.
policy through advocacy? And I'm saying that in thinking through this and in answering this question, you can think about it on the individual level. In other words, Derek, I think I can influence climate policy through A, B, C, D. Or you can think of it collectively and say, we in the Wycliffe network can influence climate policy through advocacy by doing A, B, C, D. You understand?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Abuaje Hannes is saying, I can influence climate policy through advocacy by raising awareness, engaging with decision makers, organizing public campaigns, and pushing for laws that support environmental protection, renewable energy,
Okay.
and goals.
Okay, I want your answers to be a little bit less general and more specific. You know, we sort of to trigger in you something that you might want to do. But when it's general, you're likely not to do it, isn't it? You're picking up from the discussions we've had, but I don't want you to reiterate the discussions we have so much as apply them. So in your experience or looking at your capacity, how do you think you can influence climate policies through advocacy? So you have to give me a specific policy that you want to influence. Any contribution? Yes.
Yes, Prof.
Okay. Can you share, please?
Annabelle is saying, I think I can educate my colleagues in the university on the use of plastics and its effect on the environment, since it doesn't get destroyed and causes lots of environmental hazards. I would also encourage them to patronize business that use paper packaging that is more sustainable.
Okay, that's great. Can I just make a quick comment? That's Annabelle. Annabelle, thank you for the contribution. It's a great one. It's an example of trying to influence behaviors rather than policy, which is great, targeted at students and youth, yeah, because students tend to be young people, great. However, you have to go beyond that. And I like this example. What will be the policy tied to that? What will you, and who would you want to then target? Anybody, not just Annabelle. Annabelle has supplied us with a good example to build on. So, but I'm saying that what she's described is advocacy targeted at a more general public, even though it's defined as students, to change behavior. But if she wants to change policy, who would she have to target? And what would the policy be like? Just quickly. Terry, has anybody supplied the answer?
Not yet.
Okay, I'll give you 1 second in the interest of time, and then I will sort of make the suggestion. if nobody
Okay.
does.
Okay. Jacqueline. Jacqueline is okay.
Mhm.
Jacqueline
Hi,
Clancy
Jacqueline.
can influence climate through advocacy by clarifying the message of climate change in a basic way for people to understand through means like a compelling, relatable story, and also collaborate with like-minded organizations.
No. Okay, so that's not tied to Annabelle's. Let me just quickly move on by suggesting that if Annabelle wanted to do the kind of advocacy that she suggested, it's great, but it could also be complemented by advocacy on policy, which means she needs to engage university management, for example, to have a policy on how we use or not use plastics and how we get rid of plastics. So that's where the policy angle comes in. I hope you understand. So the policy angle means a different group of people who you haven't identified yet that you have to identify in your campaign, because they are the decision makers. Remember, we said policy advocacy targets the decision makers. So the university management, they are the decision makers. The vice chancellor, the registrar, the big people, they are the decision makers. So you have your advocacy has to target them to get them to have a policy so that it is, and policies then are implemented. So they implement that policy, and they can implement that policy by in all kinds of ways, providing the resources to make that happen. So for example, if the university says, we now have a policy where we are reducing single plastic use on campus, then part of it is to make sure that there are incentives for people not to use single plastics. What will those incentives look like? So for example, if in every classroom, and we're dreaming a bit, but if in every classroom you make sure that you have a dispenser so that people do not come to class, and you ban people coming to class with their own little, Voltic bottles or something like that, or you decide to complement that also, you do put recycling bins there for students to put stuff in, and so that later on is collected and the bottles are recycled and all kinds of things, okay? So you need to do that. So that's an example. Okay, let me move along. Or unless, because I want us to spend the last few minutes looking at our case study. Unless, Terry, is there another example that you want to share that is quite different, but that speaks to policy?
No, they are all sounding the same. They are all heading
Okay.
towards this. A hand
Okay.
is up.
Yeah, Abdul Mumin, please, you can ask your question.
Thank you. Please, it's not a question I want to ask, but it's
Okay.
something I shared which I think is a bit different.
Okay.
And I think I can influence climate policy through advocacy by trying to do a research on climate issues that affects members of the community I find myself, and trying to come up
Okay.
with possible solutions or possible policies which, when they are implemented, would go a long way to help go a long way to mitigate climate change or reduce much of its awareness. And also being privilege to be part of the She Leads UN Climate Cohort for the 2024-2025 year. I think I would have much more opportunity to influence climate policy by doing so much on the climate cohorts. That is doing all assignments I am being asked to do, and the researchers we are always
Okay.
asked, the weekly researchers, said that when I
Okay.
get the opportunity to attend COP29, I'll be able to present those issues to the stakeholders who are at the forefront of implementing policies.
Okay, Muyasa, thank you for your contribution, and I'm glad you made it because I need to clarify. It gives me an opportunity to clarify the difference between advocacy and doing research in order to inform advocacy. Because what you've just described is doing the groundwork to inform the advocacy. So in other words, doing research, identifying policies, all those things that you're talking about in order to help you mount the advocacy. But that is not advocacy. Maybe you can describe it as advocacy. You can describe it as policy engaged research. That's the name we usually speak to that. And it's very, very useful because you need knowledge and information to help your advocacy. But that is not the advocacy. The advocacy means that you need to get out of the classroom and you need to engage the stakeholders that are needed. We really don't have a lot of time. So Gifty, very quickly.
Okay, Prof. I wanted to ask, I wrote in the chat that we as YClip members can influence the government to create a policy that makes climate change studies a part of the courses that we read from basic school up to the tertiary level. Do you think it's a policy advocate?
Yes, that's a very interesting one. That's a very, very interesting one. And then you begin to unpack who you should target for that policy. Government is generic, but it's good. So the government, generically speaking, is a decision maker, but then you begin to unpack it. Who in government? So you begin to map out who you need to influence in the education sector that can help bring about the change. It may Ministry of Education, Ghana Education Service, and the actors in that space would be important. Perhaps in such an endeavor, you want to also identify education-related civil society organizations to team up with for that advocacy. And the very last one, I promise you, then I have to move, is Mami Sika Mensaboso, because I suspect, Mami, you really want to contribute something. So quickly.
Yeah, so thank you, Prof. So Ghana is a country where we believe in the chieftaincy system. We respect our chiefs so much. So I believe if we target chiefs and speak to them to bring certain rules on single plastic use, recycling, and those things, they can also help us influence their community members. I don't know if that's
Correct.
right.
No, that's also helpful. Again, you're beginning to unpack, and I'm glad that you are beginning to unpack a little bit more, deliberate a little bit more on who to influence, and definitely you're right, chiefs within our communities are important. At the local level, they are decision makers as well. So you could influence them. And sometimes in our rural communities, when the chief issues a fatwa, and by fatwa, I mean when the chief says, don't do something, it can be even much more effective than when central government says we shouldn't do it. We usually don't obey those rules, but at the local level, and again, so then we begin to see that, yes, that's a good to target it at this grassroots level. It may be more effective. Recently, I saw a social media, I'm reminded, saw a social media clip on the Asantehene talking about Galamsey and saying that people keep blaming the government, and he's not saying that the government doesn't have a role to play. However, and he was talking to his chiefs, if the chiefs in the local areas decided that they did not want Galamsey in their area, then Galamsey will not happen. And that they needed also to take the blame for Galamsey. So that feeds into what you've just shared, Mamisika. Thank you. Okay. So now the last thing we're going to do before we end the day is to look at a case study. And the title of this case study is Fighting the Good Fight. It's about how two South African women stopped the president of South Africa, Jacob Zuma, and the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin. They stopped a $76 billion Russian nuclear deal. So I want us to read it together, but really, who has the loveliest reading voice? Volunteer. I want a volunteer to read along. Geraldo. Okay. Geraldo, can you read? Everybody is looking at it, but can you read through with us, for us?
Yes, please. Yes. It made no sense.
Geraldo, go ahead. And after I hadn't realized I'd muted. Sorry. But I want you to start reading, and then Christina also put her hand up. And so when you're halfway through, then Christina will take over from you. Thank you.
Okay. It made no sense that a country like South Africa, with year-round sunshine, would abandon its renewable energy options to focus on nuclear power instead. But the nuclear energy deal between South Africa and Russia has been at the center of much of South Africa's political uncertainty, as well as corruption allegations under former President Jacob Zuma, who resigned in February. The deal, which would have cost South Africa $76 billion to build a Russian-run nuclear energy plant, would have gone ahead if it weren't for two women for their work. Makoma Lekalala Kalala, 52, and Liz McDade, 55, were among those honored with the Goldman Environmental Prize in San Francisco on April 23, 2018. In 2014, Lekala Kala received a tip from environmental activists in Russia that the South African government had signed a secret deal with the Russian state nuclear energy corporation, Rosatom, to build a massive new power plant. As the head of a volunteer-driven organization called Earth Life, Lekala Kala began to stage small protests around Johannesburg outside the office of the National Power Supplier ESCOM, but needed to create more awareness about the deal. She contacted Liz McDade.
So now Christina should come in. Christina, come in and read.
Okay, yes, please.
And I see Franklin wants to read also. So
Okay,
Franklin,
started
after Christina. Christina, please go on.
Hello.
Christina, we are losing you. Christina, we are losing you.
Activists in Cape Town and from the Southern African community.
Christina, I think even though you want to volunteer, we can't hear you. Derek, your hand is up.
Yes, please. Thank you. She contacted Liz McDade, an old friend and a veteran anti-nuclear activist in Cape Town. Every Wednesday morning, McDade and a handful of protesters from the Southern African Faith Communities Environment Institute stood outside Parliament to raise awareness about the deal, which would have put the state further in debt. As South Africans learn more about the proposed nuclear bid, the two women and the NGOs they represent approached a court in October 2015 to compel the state to follow the law in procuring nuclear deals. They also petitioned the Energy and Public Enterprises ministers to allow public consultation before any deals were finalized. By then, the energy minister had already represented the Russia deal to Parliament as an intergovernmental agreement between Pretoria and Moscow that would seize 9,600 megawatts of nuclear power added to South Africa's grid. The minister swore that no binding agreement had been signed without the proper oversight, but the environmentalists argued otherwise.
Okay, now Franklin.
Prof, I think he is Felix, not Franklin.
Oh, okay. Or I saw also Fauzia or somebody who wanted to read.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Fauzia. Yes. Oh, ladies, do you want to read quickly? Maybe this wasn't a good.
Okay, I'll read.
Okay, go ahead. I was Franklina. Okay, it was Franklina I saw. Please go ahead, Franklina. And somebody should mute their mic. Franklina is on the floor. Please mute. Franklina, go ahead.
Prof, I think the noise is background.
Controversy. All right, I'm reading.
Okay.
Controversy over the deal led to the firing of former Finance Minister Lahan Nene, who refused to sign off on it. The deal would have allegedly enriched Zuma's son, Duduzen Zuma, and his allies, the Gupta family, who had already acquired a uranium mine, allegedly in preparation for the nuclear project. In the meantime, Vladimir Putin's political image began to lean larger over daily politics in South Africa. Eventually, the two virtually unknown NGOs won their court bid, and a judge ruled that any deal with Russia was unlawful. A judge set aside any agreement with Rosatom, signed or not, and ordered that if South Africa wanted nuclear power, it will need to restart the bidding process. The time with the proper public involvement, with Zuma seen out of office. In January then, Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa scrapped any nuclear ambition when he said South Africa simply has no money to build a nuclear power station. Thank you. Okay.
Okay, and let me just end it by saying that the environmental price comes nearly a year since the court ruling, but Likalakala is still cautious about the use of nuclear energy in South Africa, even with Zuma gone. In January, Rosatom entered the South African economy anyway with a new deal to develop and manage a hydroelectric power scheme. Still, any energy deals in South Africa will likely come under great scrutiny from now on. And it ends with a quote, "The nuclear deal was, and potentially still is, a major threat to the livelihood of South African citizens and our quality of life. There are other ways of generating energy, ways that are green and affordable, and puts the power in the hands of the people." The end. So we will end this class by asking, first of all, what lessons did you learn from the case study we just read? I think you will agree with me that it was a successful advocacy led by the two women. What lessons is there in it for you based on our discussion so far? Geraldo.
Yes,
And
Prof.
you can put it in the chat very quickly also. Yeah.
I'll just,
Geraldo.
yes,
Yes, talk.
yes.
Yeah.
I think what I've learned is that no matter how small our voices may sound or how faint they may sound, so far as it is producing a sound, we are being heard, and we shouldn't think that because of where we are from, we cannot advocate for change. So the story of these two gallant women shows us that our voices are powerful, and if we effect them towards a change for the climate of the earth, we are going to go far.
Okay. Wisdom. Thank you. Wisdom.
Yes, madam. So please, I think this has helped me realize the power of civil society in holding governments accountable for transparent and responsible decision-making on energy policies. Thank you.
Fantastic. And remember that the article talked about the women belonging to NGOs. So they led it, but it was not exclusively just left on their shoulders alone. Mercy. Mercy.
Okay, thank you. Hello, please, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, please.
Mercy, we can.
Our voice heard.
Mercy, you have to repeat yourself. You broke up.
Okay, I was saying that this is a good platform. When we become fellows, we should always make bold advocacies concerning climate action and the urgency of climate change. Yes, please, that's what I have to say.
Okay, and Felix.
I've learned that we must be persistent with our advocacy and we must not give up until we realize the change that we have advocated for, and that women can play a very crucial role as far as climate change advocacy is concerned, and women must be empowered equally as men. Thank you.
Thank you, Felix, the gender advocate, but there's no reason why we should think women cannot be as equally capable as men at this point. I want to think that and there are lots of women in this network, they're just as empowered as the men. Great. Israel.
Okay, thank you very much. So what I want to add up, this means we also need to be aware of current affairs, because they're not aware of this stuff. We didn't know what's going on and how they're supposed to impact or deal with these things. Now we have to make sure that we are listening to our current affairs, so that if anything, we can also do something about it.
Okay, very good. Let me just emphasize and rephrase Israel's very cogent point. Is the fact that you can't be a good advocate if your ears are not on the ground relating to the issues that you care about. Okay, so you have to be up to date. You have to be clued in. You have to be engaged in order to know what's going on so that you can intervene if you think that there's need to intervene. Vincent. Hey. Vincent.
Okay, so I have learned that it is important to ensure that international agreement and projects align with broader climate and sustainability goals. So advocates should push for policies and deals that support renewable energy and also sustainable practices rather than investing in technologies that may conflict with long-term environmental objectives.
Vincent has really read more into the case study than I don't think it has to be mutually exclusive. You can invest in the technologies as well, but I think that what I take from your point, or in fact, maybe that's not what you intended, but I am going to use your point to make that point, is the fact that we must connect local actions to international agreements. So if our governments have agreed on the international level to do something and they are not doing it, and we have our ears to the ground, we must hold them accountable through our advocacy efforts. And that the last, I think we need to wrap this up, because I would like us to answer if you can think of similar successful advocacy efforts in Ghana. If you cannot, because our time is up, I'd like for you to bring it, put it in the chat or send it to Terry to send to me for tomorrow, because we're building on the conversation today with tomorrow's class. So, Joel, I like that you are all very participatory. I really like a participatory class. I don't want to discourage you. So, Joel.
Okay, thank you, Prof. So what I learned is that the women were able to present a well-planned case, which helped them bring on board stakeholders and then relevant institutions for the action.
Yes, fantastic. You're right. Absolutely right. Which means they needed to do their homework, right?
Yes, Prof.
And I like the point you've made, Joel. And again, we will sort of reinforce these in tomorrow's class, that that it needs joint up action. Okay, so she brought on board, she identified the relevant institutions that needed to be engaged, brought on board others. Prince. And then there'll be one last one, and that will be it. Prince.
Thank you, Prof, for this opportunity. I think the successful advocacy efforts in Ghana, the major one is the Galamsey or the illegal mining protest. And in 2017, the media coalition, they did a campaign against this Galamsey, and they are still fighting for it.
Okay, so that's a good example of an advocacy campaign, except it hasn't resulted in success yet. But that's a good example. Okay, all right. So, but I'm still interested in us thinking of some more. So tomorrow, as many of you as possible, come to class, come to the platform with examples of successful advocacy efforts in Ghana. Okay. On that note, Terry, I think I'll end here.
Thank you, Prof.
Okay. And thank you all. We will reconvene tomorrow and conclude this segment. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So we will see you again tomorrow, same time.
Yes, please.